Welcome to Mysteries and Crime, where we uncover the chilling secrets behind history's most perplexing cases. Tonight, we delve into the murder of Laci Peterson, a case that gripped the nation and shattered lives. But here's the question for you. Was justice truly served? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Laci Peterson, a vibrant 27-year-old woman, was 8 months pregnant when she vanished from her Modesto, California home on Christmas Eve in 2002. Her husband, Scott Peterson, reported her missing, but soon suspicions arose. The case took shocking turns before it reached a verdict that still divides the public. It was Christmas Eve. The streets of Modesto shimmered with festive lights, but for one family, the holiday spirit was overshadowed by fear. Scott Peterson claimed he left home that morning for a fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina. When he returned, Laci was gone. Her car was still in the driveway, her purse untouched, and the family dog, Mackenzie, was wandering outside with a muddy leash. A frantic search began. Family and friends plastered missing person flyers across town. Volunteers combed through fields, parks, and reservoirs. The media quickly caught wind of the story, and soon Laci's disappearance became national news. But as the days passed, whispers grew louder about Scott's behavior, his alibi, and most damningly, his secret affair with a woman named Amber Frey. The community held vigils, clinging to hope that Laci and her unborn son, Connor, would return safely. Then 4 months later, the nightmare turned real. In April 2003, a couple walking along the San Francisco Bay Shore discovered a decomposing fetus, umbilical cord still attached. A day later, Laci's mutilated remains surfaced nearby. Suspicion turned into certainty. The hunt for answers intensified, and the truth would be more horrifying than anyone imagined. Laci Denise Peterson was more than just a name in a tragic headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, and an expectant mother, eagerly awaiting the birth of her first child, whom she and Scott had planned to name Connor. Born in April 1975, Laci grew up in Modesto, California, a place where she was known for her warm smile and infectious laughter. She had a deep love for gardening, a passion for cooking, and an eye for interior design. After meeting Scott while attending California Polytechnic State University, she fell head over heels. They married in 1997, appearing to have the perfect life, at least on the surface. At the time of her disappearance, 33 weeks pregnant. She had spent the previous night speaking to her mother, Sharon Rocha, about Christmas plans. Everything seemed normal. But behind the scenes, a darker truth was unfolding, one that would only be revealed after her death. Laci's remains, found in the San Francisco Bay, were in a severely deteriorated state. The autopsy could not determine an exact cause of death, but evidence suggested she had been weighed down with makeshift anchors. Her once hopeful future was reduced to an unspeakable tragedy, and the hunt for her killer was already well underway. Scott Peterson was the doting husband, or so it seemed. Born in October 1972, he grew up in a relatively comfortable home and was known as a charming, confident individual. He worked as a fertilizer salesman, and to those on the outside, he and Laci had a picture-perfect marriage. But cracks had formed long before Laci vanished. Behind closed doors, Scott was living a double life. Just weeks before Laci went missing, he began an affair with Amber Frey, a Fresno-based massage therapist. Scott told Amber he was single, even claiming he had lost his wife. This revelation, which later became a bombshell in the case, raised chilling questions. Had Scott already decided to kill Laci before she ever went missing? His behavior in the wake of Laci's disappearance fueled suspicions. Instead of searching for his wife, Scott was seen playing golf, shopping for a new truck, and, most disturbingly, continuing his relationship with Amber. He showed little emotion in press interviews, leading many to question his sincerity. Then came the final nail in the coffin. Just days before his arrest, Scott was found near the Mexican border with dyed hair, a stash of cash, and multiple cell phones. It appeared he was planning to flee. His actions painted a damning picture, and soon he would stand trial for the murder of his wife and unborn son. Christmas Eve, 2002, started as any ordinary day. Or so it seemed. Scott Peterson claimed he left home around 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina, a roughly 90-minute drive from Modesto. Around 10 a.m., a neighbor found Mackenzie wandering the street, leash still attached, but no sign of Laci. By early evening, when Laci's stepfather reported her missing, the search began. Police combed the area, and within hours, suspicions turned toward Scott. As the investigation unfolded, Scott's inconsistencies became glaring. His fishing trip raised eyebrows. Who goes fishing alone on Christmas Eve? More troubling, he couldn't recall what bait he used, nor did he seem overly concerned about his missing wife. On December 26th, Scott's affair with Amber Frey came to light. In a stunning revelation, Amber cooperated with police, recording phone calls in which Scott lied repeatedly. In one, recorded on December 31st, he told Amber he was in Paris celebrating New Year's Eve, when, in reality, he was attending a vigil for Laci. Fast forward to April 2003, the bodies of Laci and baby Connor washed ashore near the very marina where Scott had been fishing. On April 18th, Scott was arrested, found near the Mexican border with dyed hair, $15,000 in cash, and a vehicle full of survival gear. The condition of her remains made it impossible to determine a cause of death, but several theories emerged: strangulation or smothering. Many experts believe Scott may have killed Laci in their home, possibly by strangulation. No signs of struggle were found, which suggests a sudden and controlled act. Poisoning or drugging. Though no evidence confirmed this, some suspects Scott could have drugged Laci before transporting her body. Dismemberment or body weighting. It was theorized that Scott used concrete anchors to weigh Laci's body down in the bay, which is why only parts of her torso were recovered. But why would Scott kill his pregnant wife? Prosecutors pointed to one glaring reason: he wanted out. He didn't want to be a father. He didn't want to be a husband. And he wanted a fresh start with Amber Frey. Scott's callous actions, his lies, his demeanor, and his suspicious behaviors reinforced the prosecution's case. However, some skeptics argue that the evidence against Scott was purely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence linked him directly to the crime. Yet when the jury deliberated, they had one question to answer: was there any reasonable doubt? And in the end, their verdict would send shockwaves across the country. From the moment Laci Peterson was reported missing, law enforcement zeroed in on Scott Peterson. Though they initially handled the case as a missing persons investigation, red flags emerged almost immediately. Scott's lack of emotion baffled detectives. When questioned, his responses were detached, rehearsed, while the Rocha family, the heartbroken parents and siblings of Laci, pleaded for her safe return. Scott was seen making casual phone calls and smiling at reporters. The biggest break in the case came when Amber Frey, a woman from Fresno approached police. She revealed that she had been dating Scott, and he had told her his wife was gone. What she didn't know at the time was that Laci was still alive. With the investigation now fully targeting Scott, Amber agreed to record their conversations. Scott continued lying even as Laci's case dominated national news. One phone call recorded on December 31st captured Scott telling Amber he was celebrating in Paris, while in reality he was at a candlelight vigil for Laci. This revelation painted Scott as deceitful, manipulative, and unbothered by his wife's disappearance. But police still needed one thing: Laci's body. Without it, Scott could argue she had been abducted, or even that she was still alive. Then, in April 2003, the waters of the San Francisco Bay would deliver the gruesome truth. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog along the San Francisco Bay made a horrifying discovery. A small, decomposed fetus had washed ashore. The next day, a mutilated female torso was found nearby. DNA confirmed what everyone feared. It was Laci and Connor Peterson. With bodies now recovered, investigators moved swiftly. Scott Peterson was arrested on April 18th in La Jolla, California, near the Mexican border. The details of his arrest only deepened suspicions. He had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, carried $15,000 in cash, and had his brother's ID. He claimed he was headed to play golf, but police suspected otherwise. Was Scott planning to flee? Charged with 2 counts of murder, one for Laci and one for Connor, Scott pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that this was a calculated, cold-blooded crime. Scott's defense, led by high-profile attorney Mark Garagos, maintained that Laci had been abducted and killed by unknown assailants. They pointed to an alleged burglary near the Peterson home around the time of her disappearance. But there was no solid evidence supporting this theory, and the prosecution was ready to dismantle it in court. The trial of Scott Peterson began on June 1st, 2004, and became one of the most widely watched cases of the decade. Prosecutors painted Scott as a liar, a cheater, and, most importantly, a killer. Amber Frey's testimony was damning. She detailed Scott's lies and his widower story, proving he was already acting as if Laci was gone before she actually disappeared. The fishing trip. Scott's alibi was flimsy. He claimed he had gone fishing, but when asked what he caught, he had no answer. His route also matched the exact area where Laci and Connor's bodies were later found. His actions. After Laci's disappearance, Scott tried to sell their house, inquired about selling Laci's car, and seemed more concerned with his own comfort than finding his wife. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence tying Scott to the murders. No eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no DNA inside the home. They suggested alternative suspects, pointing to a nearby burglary and mysterious witnesses, but none of these theories held weight. After months of emotional testimony and legal battles, the case went to the jury, and their verdict would soon shake the nation. On November 12, 2004, after nearly 5 months of testimony and 7 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The nation held its breath as the courtroom fell silent. Guilty. Scott Peterson was convicted on 2 counts of murder, first degree for Laci Peterson and second degree for Connor Peterson. The Rocha family wept, embracing one another in relief. The jury had rejected Scott's defense and instead found the prosecution's case compelling, despite the lack of direct forensic evidence. But the trial wasn't over yet. On December 13th, the jury recommended the death penalty. A month later, Judge Alfred DeLucchi formally sentenced Scott to death, placing him on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Even as he was led away in shackles, Scott maintained his innocence. His supporters, including his family, argued that the case against him was purely circumstantial. But for Laci's loved ones, justice had finally been served. However, as the years passed, new legal challenges arose, and the debate over whether Scott truly received a fair trial ignited heated controversy. Scott Peterson's legal battle didn't end with his conviction. In the years following his trial, his defense team filed multiple appeals, arguing that pretrial publicity, jury misconduct, and lack of physical evidence had unfairly swayed the verdict. Another major twist came in 2021, when a judge considered allegations of juror misconduct. One juror, Rochelle Nice, failed to disclose that she had previously filed a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend's girlfriend while pregnant. This raised concerns that she was biased against Scott. Despite this, in December 2022, a judge ruled that Scott would not receive a new trial. His murder conviction stood, though he would now serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even with these developments, debates continue. Was Scott Peterson truly guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or did media, sensationalism, and circumstantial evidence seal his fate? The Peterson case became one of the most infamous trials in modern American history. It was covered endlessly by media outlets, drawing comparisons to the O.J. Simpson case. The public was divided. Many believed Scott was a narcissistic killer, while others thought he was a victim of a flawed justice system. The case also led to legislative changes. In 2004, the federal government passed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. It recognized unborn children as victims if they were harmed during federal crimes, an acknowledgement of the tragic fate of baby Connor. Meanwhile, Laci's family dedicated their lives to keeping her memory alive. Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, wrote a book, For Laci, a mother's story of love, loss, and justice, detailing her painful journey. The Rocha family continued to advocate for victims' rights, ensuring that Laci and Connor were never forgotten. As for Scott, he remains behind bars at Mule Creek State Prison. Even today, he claims innocence, and his legal team continues to seek new avenues for appeal. But whether he will ever be exonerated, or if justice was truly served, remains a question that haunts true crime followers to this day. The case against Scott Peterson was built on circumstantial evidence. No eyewitnesses saw him commit the crime. No murder weapon was ever found. There was no forensic proof, no blood, no DNA, no fingerprints linking Scott to the act of murder. So did Scott Peterson really kill Laci? Prosecutors argued that Scott's actions after Laci disappeared, his lies, his affair, his lack of emotion, and his suspicious fishing trip pointed to guilt. The most damning fact? Laci and Connor's bodies washed ashore near the exact spot where Scott claimed to be fishing on December 24, 2002. But skeptics argue that suspicious behavior does not equal murder. Scott had no history of violence. Some question whether Laci could have been abducted by someone else. Could she have been killed by burglars who broke into a nearby house that same morning? The defense insisted Scott was wrongfully convicted, citing the lack of physical evidence. However, many believe that while there were no direct proofs, the totality of the circumstances overwhelmingly suggested Scott's guilt. Even today, this case remains one of the most debated in modern true crime history. Was the jury correct in their verdict, or was Scott Peterson a victim of a media-driven rush to judgment? Though her life was cut tragically short, Laci Peterson's memory continues to live on. Her family, especially her mother, Sharon Rocha, has worked tirelessly to keep her legacy alive, advocating for victims of violent crimes and ensuring that Laci's story is never forgotten. One of the most significant legal changes resulting from this case was the passage of the Unborn Victims of Violence Act in 2004, commonly referred to as Laci and Connor's Law. This federal law recognizes an unborn child as a separate legal victim if they are harmed during the commission of a federal crime. The law was passed in honor of Laci and Connor, ensuring that cases like theirs would have stronger legal protections in the future. Sharon Rocha also wrote a deeply personal memoir for Laci, a mother's story of love, loss, and justice, where she detailed her emotional journey from hope to heartbreak and ultimately to justice. Through her advocacy, Laci's story has not just been one of tragedy, but also one of impact. While Laci and Connor are gone, their memory endures, reminding the world of the importance of justice, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. The murder of Laci Peterson remains one of the most infamous cases in American history. It was a case filled with unanswered questions, shocking twists, and a trial that captivated millions. For many, Scott Peterson is guilty beyond a doubt, a cheating husband who saw his pregnant wife as an obstacle to his freedom. The fact that Laci's body was found in the exact place where Scott went fishing that day is, for most, the ultimate proof of his guilt. But for others, this case highlights the flaws in the justice system. Without direct evidence, no murder weapon, no DNA, no eyewitnesses, should a person be convicted of capital murder? And how much did the media influence the jury's perception of Scott? Regardless of where people stand on his guilt or innocence, the loss of Laci and Connor Peterson is an undeniable tragedy. A young mother-to-be, full of life and love, was robbed of her future. A baby boy never got the chance to take his first breath. Their story continues to haunt true crime enthusiasts, legal scholars, and the public alike. And even after all these years, the final chapter of the Peterson case may still not be written. The murder of Laci Peterson remains one of the most infamous and unsettling cases in modern history. It was a trial that gripped the nation, exposing the darker sides of love, betrayal, and justice. For those who believe Scott Peterson is guilty, his lies, his affair, and his lack of emotion all painted a damning picture of a man desperate to escape his marriage. The fact that Laci's body was found near the exact location where Scott went fishing that morning is, for many, the smoking gun that sealed his fate. But for others, this case stands as a warning about how the justice system can be influenced by intense media coverage. Without physical evidence, no murder weapon, no DNA, no cause of death, should Scott have been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt? Did the jury's decision reflect true justice, or was he already guilty in the public's eyes before the trial even began? One thing is certain: Laci and baby Connor deserved a future they never got to live. Their names are remembered not just as victims, but as symbols of the real human cost behind every true crime case. Despite Scott Peterson's conviction and life sentence, the case is far from forgotten. His legal team continues to fight for his exoneration, while others remain convinced that justice was served. The questions surrounding this case still spark debate. Could someone else have committed the crime? How much did media pressure impact the trial? Would Scott have ever been convicted if Laci's remains had never been found? No matter where you stand, one thing is undeniable. This case continues to fascinate, unsettle, and raise more questions than answers. And perhaps we may never truly know the full truth. As we close the chapter on the Laci Peterson murder case, we are left with more questions than answers. Was Scott Peterson truly guilty? Or was he the victim of a trial shaped by public perception? With no direct forensic evidence, yet an overwhelming number of circumstantial clues, this case continues to haunt both legal experts and true crime enthusiasts alike. Did you catch the clue hidden in today's story? Drop your guess in the comments below, and join us next week to see if you're right. Thank you for joining us on Mysteries and Crime. Remember, the truth is rarely straightforward. Keep questioning, keep theorizing, and until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.